It is now my great pleasure to say a few words about our 2006 Stellafane Convention keynote speaker. She attended New York University and has a master's degree in the history of science. She's co-authored or edited 2 books and written some 250 articles on science and technology, 15 of which have won top journalism awards. She has been an editor for Scientific American magazine and a founding senior editor for Omni magazine and a senior editor for IEEE Spectrum magazine. Meanwhile, she has enjoyed a keen interest in science and adventure, the history of exploration, and bicycle touring. She's a certified bicycle mechanic and still does that, as active in that as I understand. She's definitely a total solar eclipse bug, as she's chased 5 solar eclipses around the world: Mexico, the Arctic, Sahara, South Pacific, and all the way out to Montana. She has trekked to the Mount Everest base camp and flown to El Salvador to adopt her daughter as a single mom, and her daughter is in the audience. She currently resides in Cleveland, Ohio. This is her second visit to Stellafane, and her talk is entitled Albert Ingalls and Roger Hayward. Please help me give a warm Stellafane welcome to Trudy Bell.
Thank you so much. Yes, it's my second Stellafane visit. The last time I was here, unfortunately, was a time when Walter Scott Houston and Red Storm were still alive. So it's been a while since I've been here, and it's really great to see that thousands more people are coming. I think this is the largest audience I've ever spoken in front of. Actually, this talk is a briefer. It's about Russell Porter and Albert Ingalls and Roger Hayward. Just out of curiosity, everybody here has probably heard of Russell Porter and Albert Ingalls. How many people here have heard about Roger Hayward? Okay, a few people. All right. Roger Hayward, more of you probably know who he is, but not by his name. If you ever have read Scientific American's Amateur Scientist, column anytime between about 1958 and 1975, and had a chance to look at the illustrations. He did all those illustrations. That's Roger Hayward. I'm going to give you just a quick recap. Their lives were very much intertwined. Russell Porter was born in 1871 in Springfield, Vermont, this town. He ended up, when he was starting to go to college at MIT, he heard a lecture by Admiral Peary, the famous Arctic explorer, and so he got bitten by the Arctic virus and ended up going up to the North Pole. At that point, Peary was trying to be the first one to get to the North Pole, and Porter ended up traveling with him and also with Frederick Cook and with a couple of other major Arctic explorers. One thing that Porter did was that he took a transit instrument there and did a lot of mapping. And the way he put it is that he filled in a lot of blank places on maps during the time that he was there. He did this for about 10 years, and he actually turned it into a paying proposition that helped him go through college, because a lot of his college friends wanted to also see what the Arctic was like, so he took them at $800 a pop. This was about $1910. So it's as if somebody now, basically, there's a factor of 20, so he was taking them at the equivalent of maybe $16,000 a pop today in today's dollars. So he was very enterprising and obviously paid his way through MIT. And then he was teaching architecture, actually, at MIT. And that's where he learned to do a lot of his three-dimensional drawings. He was also quite an artist, as everyone knows. His first urge to make a mirror, he ended up reading an article in Popular Astronomy around 1914, and it described how an obscure copy merchant had built a 10-inch reflector. And he thought, oh, that's kind of neat, I want to try that. And so he got a copy of a book called Glass Working by Heat and Abrasion by a guy named Paul Hasluck. And he was actually at this point friends with Governor Harkness, who was governor of Vermont. And Harkness actually encouraged him. In fact, he encouraged him in the most material way possible. Periodically, you just send him money through the mail and say, just, here, buy what you want. Buy some machine tools. Buy some, oh, thank you very much. Thanks. So I need the third hand for that. Thank you. He actually ended up working for Harkness. Harkness hired him to work in his machine tools shop to basically create optical, or create instruments that involved optical components. For example, some of these lathes and milling machines that he had were very long, and so he figured out how to use optics to fold optical paths so that it could be shorter and not occupy so much space on the mill floor. Basically, Harkness was paying him to be a genius. In any case, around that time, so this is in the 1920s, he started making mirrors and everything. And what happened is that around this same time, Albert Ingalls, who was 17 years younger than he, was working at Scientific American. Ingalls had gone to Cornell University and had graduated there, and then he got really involved with, he was an editor at Scientific American. His title was associate editor. It's not clear to me whether he was on staff or full-time freelance. And the reason that I say that is that in the correspondence between Ingalls and Roger Hayward, at one point Ingalls got audited by the IRS, and the IRS auditor said to him, now let me get this straight. You have proposed 35 articles for Scientific American, and they accepted them all. And he said that the IRS agent had a hard time believing that he was actually full-time freelance. So he may have been on staff at one point and then continued working on a column, but he was doing a lot of work for Scientific American. He was editing articles, eventually writing books, and also conducting a column that turned into the Amateur Science. But in the 1920s, he ended up finding out about Porter and asking Porter to write an article for Scientific American on amateur telescope making, which Porter did, and illustrated it with some of his wonderful three-dimensional cutaway drawings. And Ingalls put a little hook into the article, and he said to the readers of Scientific American, if anybody out there is really interested in this, please write to me, and we will see if we will publish more articles. And he got more than 1,000 letters in response to Porter's article. So Ingalls knew he was onto something. And after that, he ended up starting up this column in Scientific American, which went actually through a number of different name changes. It started being called something like the Backyard Astronomer, and then the Amateur Astronomer, and then Telescoptics, the Amateur Telescope Maker, and eventually ended up becoming the Amateur Scientist in the 1950s when Gerard Thiel and Dennis Monaghan bought the magazine in 1948 and wanted to broaden it out to all different sciences. In any case, it was actually Albert Ingalls who was responsible for getting Porter the job at Mount Palomar with George Ellery Hale. What happened is that Hale had come to, actually I guess had come to New York City and was sitting down and having lunch with Ingalls at the Algonquin Hotel. And he said, look, I want to talk to you about big telescopes. You know, Palomar is this twinkle in our eye at this point, and he wanted to get some publicity in Scientific American. And the more Ingalls heard Hale talk, the more he started talking up and said, you need this guy up in Vermont, Porter. And so when Hale said, sure, I'd be glad to meet him, Ingalls telegraphed Porter and said, get on the night train, come down here, have lunch tomorrow with George Ellery Hale. And there's a wonderful quote, if I can find it here. It was, that next noon, Hale and Porter and I lunched at the same table. I watched Porter's charm, knowledge, and versatility go to work. From his facile fingers to the back of a menu fell those little sketches that came so effortlessly about his own idea for big telescopes. And Hale stuck the menu in his pocket and went away. A few months later, he actually sent Pease and Anderson, who were the chief designers and in charge of to build what became Mount Palomar Observatory. Hale sent them to visit Porter, but didn't tell him who he was. They just went and posed as if they were telescope nuts, and to find out what Porter was really like, and also so as not to sort of freak out Porter by the importance of it. So they basically did the second interview incognito, and then Hale wired Porter after Peace and Anderson said, yeah, we want this guy. Hale wired Porter saying, sell your house, sell your furniture, bring nothing, just bring your family, come on out to Southern California, and that's how Porter got the job. And basically, this mythology that had grown up around Porter's role. Some people even said that he was like the chief engineer, the chief designer of Palomar. That's not true. Porter himself was always very open about the fact that Palomar was designed by many people. And what he basically did, what his role was, well, he had a number of roles, but what his role was in terms of the instrument was basically being a human CAD/CAM machine, what we would today call virtual prototyping. He would look at the two-dimensional plans in plan, elevation, and profile, and he would translate that in his wonderful three-dimensional mind into these three-dimensional cutaway drawings to make sure that when something moved, it wouldn't bump into something else or, you know, cause sort of a problem. Many of those sketches were actually for engineering purposes, not for aesthetic purposes. Most of them, he actually did about 1,000 of those sketches for various parts of the telescope and its operations. Hale, however, was always well aware of the value of publicity and ended up asking him to finish those 24 sketches, which of course became just terrific PR for the mountain and for the observatory. But Porter did a lot more than just the stuff for the telescope itself. He went up and camped for several months in a tent atop of Palomar Mountain, did contour drawings. This was in the days before topographical maps or before the topo maps were actually out there. And so he mapped all the contour lines with his transit telescope from from his Arctic days of the mountain, designed where the roads would be, where the various buildings would be, and he did also do the architecture for the dome, for the 200-inch. In any case, now we turn to Roger Hayward, who is much less well known, but deserves actually to be in this same company. Hayward was about 5 years younger than Ingalls. He went to MIT as well. He went to MIT like 1915 and 1919, and his first year at MIT may or may not, of course, have coincided with Porter's last year there, because they both, he started there in 1915, Porter's last year was 1915. It's unclear, I haven't yet established whether they actually overlapped, but they certainly, Hayward certainly would have known about Porter, and eventually he met two important people. Hayward met two important people while he was there. He met Samuel Lundeen, who was a slightly older student, and even though his last name is spelled Lundeen, he apparently was a short-tailed cousin to the optical family of Carl Axel Robert Lundeen, same pronunciation. In any case, he met him, a slightly older student, 2 years ahead of him, and he also met Cram, I can't remember his first name, but he was the Dean of Architecture at MIT, and he was also a partner in Cram and Ferguson, which was an architectural firm in Boston. Lundeen, after graduation, went to Cram and Ferguson, convinced Cram and Ferguson to hire Hayward, which he did. Hayward ended up working on a number of things like the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City, which is, by the way, still unfinished, but Hayward did work for one of the wings there. Lundeen then went back to his hometown, which was Los Angeles, started his own firm, and hired Hayward to come out to Los Angeles. So now you have Russell Porter and Roger Hayward in Los Angeles, California. This was in the 1930s. How did Hayward get involved with Palomar? Well, he actually had built telescopes. He had worked with a jeweler's lathe. He had both a scientific and an art interest, and that was why he went into architecture, because he thought it would combine both. But he was out there, and astronomy was in the air. You had Mount Wilson was the largest telescope in the world. Mount Palomar was in the process of being constructed. Griffith Observatory was in the process of being built. I mean, it was just this tremendously exciting time. And he ended up, let's see, let me just, I want to sort of quickly start going through some of these things to show you, because it's better to read, seeing is believing, and it's better to see actually some of the things that, how does this go? I just click it? Okay, there it is. How I came to know Roger Hayward, I actually spoke with him on the phone. I never met him, but I was an editor at Scientific American from 1971 to 78. And this was at the very beginning of my career. I was like 21 years old. That's a long story in itself. But in any event, I probably actually still hold the record for being the youngest ever editor at Scientific American. Not the first woman, though. My first article at Scientific American actually was for the Amateur Scientist, and it was on grazing lunar occultations observations. Roger Hayward illustrated it. And this is the type of thing he did. At the time that I was there, Hayward was in his 70s. He had vision problems. I think he had macular degeneration. And he had to use a large typewriter, and he did his illustrations 3 times up. This was chalk on black construction paper, but it was the first time that I had actually seen the shadow of the moon, projected in this way. I mean, he had this gift of really interpreting artwork in a very helpful way that helped the reader. So that was my first encounter with him. When he found out I was interested in history of astronomy, he said to me on the phone, I used to know Albert Ingalls. When, we worked together from basically 1949 to 1959 when Ingalls died. And I have all this correspondence with Ingalls. Would you be interested in it? And I said, sure, why not? And so I forgot about it. 3 weeks later, Red Strong walks into my office with this big fat green box with all this onion skin correspondence in it. And he said, here, Hayward sent this to me, this is for you. And I think I have a picture here of what the box looked like. There it is. And I kind of dipped into it. It was like right from the very beginning of their correspondence when they were dear Mr. Ingalls and dear, Mr. Hayward. And then eventually they started calling each other by their first names and then joking first names. Ingalls called Hayward Raja, probably a takeoff on his New England accent, but he spelled it R-A-J-A-H, like in India. And he was always known, and Ingalls himself was known to the staff of Scientific American, not as Unc, as he was known to the telescope makers, but as Doc Ingalls. Or sometimes Roger would write to him as Doc, D-A-W-K. So they had this really joking, bantering correspondence. And I'm sure that when Hayward sent me this correspondence, he had no idea what it was going to open up in terms about himself. He was just thinking about Ingalls. So I was young and ignorant. I mean, I was 21, what did I know? I looked into these things. 19th century was my era, not 20th century. The names meant nothing to me. Fast forward or slow forward, as you see fit, 30 years. I hung on to this stuff. So I got involved with the Antique Telescope Society, and by that time I was a little smarter about 20th century optics, and about 3 years ago I dipped into this stuff and my jaw fell open. I couldn't believe what a world it opened up, not only between Ingalls and Hayward, but also between a lot of other opticians. And by the way, a lot of what I'm telling you is as yet unpublished. Rick Weinberg, who's in the audience someplace, Sky Telescope has a manuscript that and they've accepted the manuscript and they paid me, so I hope they publish it. But so this is actually a preview of what I hope will at some point come out in Scientific American. Excuse me, I'm sorry, Sky Telescope. But in any case, this actually I ended up doing research into Hayward's patents, into correspondence that he had with other people like John Strong, the inventor of the illuminizer process, Linus Pauling, a whole bunch of other people that he was involved with. So this is patents and correspondence with a lot of other people, and a lot about his artwork. Hayward ended up working for a bunch of people, and in the 1930s he actually had he worked with Lundin's architectural firm. They actually became partners. But in the Depression, all the architectural work dried up. And so Hayward was trying to keep body and soul together he and his wife made puppets for puppet shows, and he just did everything he could. One of the things he did was be a consultant for National Technical Labs, which later became Beckman Instruments. Now, Arnold Beckman was also a professor at Caltech at this time, and so when he was also, Hayward was also illustrating lecture notes for Linus Pauling. Linus Pauling needed somebody who could visualize in 3 dimensions. What Hayward did was very similar to what Porter did in 3 dimensions. So everybody was sort of impressed by what he did for, when they saw what he did for Pauling, they wanted Hayward to illustrate his book too. So he ended up working for Arnold Beckman. Hayward also got really involved and started building his own spectrograph. And what happened is that Arnold Beckman kind of said, oh, that's a neat idea, and it became the DU spectrophotometer, which made Beckman Instruments a multi-million-dollar outfit. And he just paid Hayward a retainer, so Hayward was never rich. He also has this patent for the two-mirror Schmidt, which Hayward, by the time World War II came around, Hayward was hired to work as an optician. He got a secret clearance. He was working up at Mount Wilson Observatory as for the war effort. And one of the things that they wanted, this was pre-radar, was to have a way of looking in, the British wanted to have a way of seeing and making sure that the Nazis were not going to be attacking England. You know, they wanted to be coming across the English Channel and attacking England. And there was no real way to do that short of radar. And so what they thought is that if they have a really fast camera system with really good optics, maybe they could spy them from a distance. And so Hayward, by this time, Schmidt had come out with his Schmidt telescope, and people were really puzzled how to do the corrector plates. But Hayward thought, well, gee, if you do this as a Cassegrain telescope, you could actually mount the film from behind instead of inside the Schmidt camera, and you could end up having it as a Cassegrain. He didn't call it a Cassegrain, he called it a two-mirror Schmidt. But he also designed it, laser pointer, okay. He also designed it, you can see it's not really designed to be used as a telescope, but he has it pointing downward. This is the film cartridge. These are patent drawings. So in other words, Roger Hayward had the patent for the Schmidt Cassegrain, although not for astronomical purposes. He was adapting an astronomical purpose for aircraft surveillance. And this thing was actually built. See this drawing? Who does this drawing remind you of? Porter. No. Hayward drew this. This is Hayward's drawing. And the reason I know that is that one of the people I interviewed a number of people for my article. And luckily I did it when I did, because the 2 of them have since passed away. I interviewed Dennis Flanagan, who was the former editor at Scientific American, and Gerard Peel, both of whom knew both Ingalls and Hayward. And also I interviewed Aidan Minell, who in World War II was a 17-year-old high school student who was detailed to be a gopher to help Roger Hayward. And so Roger Hayward, Minell actually vividly remembered watching Hayward end up executing this drawing. And this thing was actually built in prototype. This is from a declassified government document that was published, or was declassified after World War II. It was actually built in prototype, and I believe it was flown out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, but it never actually went into production because at that point, by that time, radar had been invented and it was no longer needed. Apparently worked very well. I'm thinking about going back, but never mind. Roger Hayward also did an awful lot of murals and things for buildings that had an astronomical theme. This is at the Doheny Library, the entrance to the Doheny Library at the University of Southern California. I took this picture myself about a 1.5 years ago when I was out there. These are the constellations, the stars and the positions and the magnitudes are accurate down to 3rd magnitude. There's another view. Hayward also was quite a woodworker and craftsman. He designed inside the Doheny Library, he designed the walnut tables and chairs. He didn't actually physically build them all, but he designed them and commissioned them. He also did, after Porter died, and Palomar still needed to have somebody who could do cutaway drawings similar to what Porter did. And these are two drawings that Hayward had done. Now they are colored pencil drawings. These aren't the watercolor drawings. But if you notice, you can see in the right-hand drawing, you can see the constellation Orion, and then through the slit, the Pleiades. This is Roger Hayward. He bore more than a passing resemblance to Groucho Marx. And what he is doing here is that he is actually sculpting a completely completely accurate scale model of the moon, and sculpting it out of plaster. This was for Griffith Observatory and Planetarium. Porter actually, who was helping design Griffith Observatory and Planetarium, said to the people who were there, "You got to get this guy to help you with some of your exhibits." And so he did this large-scale life model for the Griffith Observatory and Planetarium. He also did one for Adler Planetarium. He did, it seems to me, he did it for another planetarium, and then Disneyland. Walt Disney got hold of him and said, "You know what, we could do something like that." And so, who here went to see Disneyland in the 1950s? Did anyone ever see Disneyland? Okay. I actually went to Disneyland in 1958, and I was 8 years old. I know a woman is not supposed to tell her age, but this is important to the story. It was 3 years after Disneyland had opened, and by that time, I guess Sputnik had been launched. Sputnik went up when I was in second grade. By this time, I was really hooked on science and everything. And one of the things that I really wanted to see was a rocket ship to the moon ride, which consisted of, basically, you sat around in this circular room, and there was a narration that you were, blasting off. And what you saw was, through a porthole in the floor, you saw the Earth receding, and up above, through a similar porthole, you saw the moon approaching. And you could see the moon, the shadows and everything. That was Roger Hayward's model. So even when I was 8 years old, I had seen some artwork that Roger Hayward had done. Roger Hayward, those models, by the way, later were also incorporated in some of Walt Disney's documentary movies on, Trip to the Moon and Tomorrowland and whatnot. Whoops, continuing on. Now this gets into some stuff that I guess some of you will be familiar with. This is some of these astronomical sketches that Roger Hayward did for Scientific American. He did them on all subjects. I mean, it wasn't just astronomy, but because this is Stellafane, I've only chosen astronomical images. But what's wonderful about them is that wood has grain and metal has sheen. And you can see in a moment how things fit together. He just had this amazing way of taking a combination of descriptions and photographs and just making it so clear. And it's very clear this was not easy, because there was plenty of correspondence between Ingalls and Hayward trying to reconcile the descriptions of some of these amateurs who were writing in about how they built something and the photographs that the people saw. Here's another one. I just love the way these things go together. By the way, you can see some Roger Hayward drawings online, because in the 1930s or 40s, he also illustrated Procedures in Experimental Physics by John Strong, and there are a couple of chapters, one of which is on glass blowing, which is online. You can find that too. But perhaps his most famous book that he illustrated was called The Architecture of Molecules. And ever since the 1930s, Linus Pauling was absolutely convinced that what was important to chemistry was not just the chemical composition of molecules, but also the 3D orientation of the molecules. And although Roger Hayward and Linus Pauling did not invent the ball and stick way of presenting, molecular bonds and everything, he did invent the way of doing it in 3 dimensions, because that was Pauling's concept. And eventually they came up with this book. You can see the cover of it up there. This book, by the way, is widely available at libraries. This was genuinely a co-authorship. There was a page of text on the left by Pauling and a full-page pastel drawing or pastel painting by Hayward on the right. And actually, he did an awful lot of illustrations for William H. Freeman. His first book for Freeman, when Freeman was first starting his publishing company, was Chemistry, the book Chemistry by Linus Pauling, which became a runaway bestseller, translated into many languages and whatnot. And basically, the illustrations were what sold the book and just really established the company, William H. Freeman, which is now owned by Scientific American. Hayward did 10 patents, and they range, you'll notice, from optical devices such as the two-mirror Schmidt to a hospital bassinet to an artist's ink pen. You know, he was very versatile in his things. And he also illustrated a wide variety of books. I've tried to track down, I don't own these books, but through libraries I've tried to track them down and look at all of them. Oceanography, chemistry, The Amateur Scientist, a book on, anti-nuclear wood. He also did fine art. And back in the 1920s, I mean, his first love was watercolors. And back in the 1920s, he entered some paintings in a juried show, and he was likened at that point to John Singer Sargent. Not a bad, that's from one of the judges. I have not seen his paintings in person. These were from online. Most of his paintings apparently are owned in private collections. Actually, I got a lucky break when I was doing a lot of the research because I ended up locating a nephew-in-law of Roger Hayward up in Canada. But by the time after Hayward died, Hayward had no children. After Hayward died, a lot of his paintings disappeared when relatives sort of just descended on him and sort of went through the stuff before Kramer was even had a chance. So that basically is 3 lives. That's actually a lickety-split version of these 3 important lives, 2 of whom are famous and 1 of whom should be in the same category, Porter, Ingalls, and Hayward. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, or try. Oh, okay.
I'll have it in a second.
Okay, do we have questions at all from anybody?
I'll put the lights.
There we go. Hard to see right now.
Why can somebody just call out if they have a question?
Right over here, this one.
Okay, yes. Excuse me?
Hi, how are you? We emailed back and forth. Question was, at the very end, with the illustrations, did you say that those are watercolor, and pastel? Because they appear to be a little of each.
He worked in a variety of media. He worked in oils, watercolor, and pastels. So it could very well have been. I don't know too much of the details. I mean, basically what I showed was pretty much all that I knew. They were mainly small thumbnail images in prices realized, at various auction sites. And those are the only 3 illustrations that are the only 3 fine art pieces that I know of. However, I know of the names of a lot of others because I went back through books about juried art shows, and I know maybe 24 names of paintings. And so at some point I'm hoping I'll be able to track some down.
All right, I'll just take them off this one.
Thank you.
All right, let's give a nice big hand for our presentation. Hold on just a second, Trudy. Trudy, we have a nice little party here. And that's a set of hats and shirts for you and your daughter, and we thank you very much for coming.